So during the last 20 years, Marcel has been involved in starting new laboratory facilities, ranging small diagnostic labs to bigger service laboratories. And now Marcel is head of one of the largest automated -80 freezer storage facilities, more than 8 million samples. So we'll see. And today we'll present the sample processing and storage risk management. So please.
Okay. There's a risk in talking about risks this late in the afternoon, but nevertheless I will start talking about it, because actually it's even a little bit fun thinking about things like this. I'm the project manager of the Livestore, and I will try to make clear what that is. And I will give, first of all, I will give a small introduction about LifeLines, and then I will talk about the laboratory automation that we have available, and then I go a little bit more into the storage part, and the whole time I will highlight the risks that are involved with all these kind of processes. So LifeLines is a population-based longitudinal cohort study and biobank, and that we aimed for 165,000 people with a 30 years follow-up. And the important thing about this is that we don't do research, but we are a national infrastructure within the Netherlands that's accessible for all researchers worldwide. So basically we are an infrastructure and we don't do research ourselves, so we facilitate research. So I was already referring to the northern part of the Netherlands. I'm from Groningen, that's our main site, but we have 11 research sites spread throughout the northern part of the Netherlands. And that's the place where all the volunteers are coming for their feces, and where we are collecting the materials and those kind of things. But we have one centralized processing facility. We chose the northern part of the Netherlands. I was saying it is a national infrastructure, but we chose the northern part of the Netherlands because it has quite a stable population. There's low migration rates. So if people are living there, they actually are staying there, and that's quite convenient if you're doing a follow-up of 30 years, because you don't want to track people throughout the whole country and even outside the country side. The population is quite representative for the whole of Europe, and the whole area is quite a big focus on healthy aging, and that's also what LifeLines is about. So this is the cohort. We started with index persons. So we took persons within an age range of 25 till 50 years, and from those people we asked the family members to participate in the study as well. And we did that by asking the spouse, so the partner of the index person, the fathers from both and mothers from both sides, and the children. And that was the study set up to make it up to 165,000 people. So this is actually what we did. And there's a lot of information in this graph. But this, because this only depicts numbers. I see it is still in Dutch, but some of you might be able to read it, but it says thousands. So in the end, we started already in 2006 with a project, and that was a small pilot project in a small village in quite a distance from our main facility, to check if we are able to get all the logistics done. And from that small pilot project, we started on to going on. And here you see in 2008, that's the moment where we get the big funds in to get the finances for the total project. And that was also the moment that we could start with implementing automation, because for automation you need actually a lot of money. And we got our own laboratory facilities and those kind of things. And from that moment on, you see that we were able to grow throughout the whole life cycle of LifeLines. And it's actually an exponential curve, and you can only meet this exponential curve if you are taking away all the bottlenecks throughout your whole production. So we made a quite nice growth in there. In the end, we ended up our inclusion with over 167,000 people, so we made our targets. And from that moment on, we are working on the follow-up studies. So you see actually that automation is important to get this growth, because if we would have been working without automation, we were still working with a lot of people pipetting, and we never were able to get these numbers done. So the population that we had is a little bit more female than male people, and that's typically what you see in population-based studies. And the collection quite resembles a normal distribution without a certain range. This is a little bit about the follow-up protocol. So we're having every 1.5 years we have a follow-up questionnaire, and after 5 years people are re-invited to come back to the research centers that we have, and they're getting a physical examination with the ECG measurement, lung function testing, and all those kind of tests. And we link with external data, and of course that is here. We're getting every 5 years we're getting the person back. We're getting in intermediate, we're getting feedback from our questionnaires, but of course the linking with the general registries, it's a continuous process, and that's the way we're collecting data. But besides collecting data, we're also collecting samples. And this is a picture of the first screening. We collected, for example, 3 tubes of 10 ml EDTA blood and a lot of other blood sample types, and each with its own target. So some of them were meant to isolate DNA, others were meant to get a blood count, and other ones are used for direct chemistry in a laboratory facility. So we did a lot of sample collections, and all these tubes had to be processed. And the processing was done in a centralized laboratory facility, and we needed to transport all the samples from the collection sites to the central processing laboratory. And we used these kind of boxes with a defined temperature range. And we actually, during transport, we also monitored the temperature of the samples that were transported, and we are transporting in these kind of racks. So then a sample arrived in the laboratory facility, and the first thing that you have to have if you're starting up a laboratory is a Lymph system. Our Lymph system was not started up directly. We didn't have a Lymph system available back in 2006, but it got implemented in 2010, so we had some backlog, and we had a whole migration process and so on. But our Lymph system is built up like this. It is a visual workflow of our whole process, and this is the starting screen, and you can immediately, you just can click on the icon here, and that opens the page that enables you to register all the samples that are coming in. And throughout the whole process, you can monitor where the samples are located at a certain moment. So here I can see that on the Tecan, our Tecan Evo 1, there are still 13 samples left to be processed. And our working process is that people are coming in the morning to take blood. That is done till 10 o'clock, and at 12 o'clock all these samples typically arrive at the laboratory facility. Then the processing starts, and before 5 o'clock all these samples have been processed and are in the storage facility. So in the end of the day, all these counters have to be 0, because everything has been processed and is in the -80 store. So now a little bit about numbers. back in the pilot phase, and the pilot phase was from 2006 to 2008, we started off with such that I'm sorry that I noticed that quite late after I sent the presentation. That's still in Dutch, but I think we can make it with some translation. We started with such screw caps, 2 ml. We have quite a lot of them, about 800,000 samples. And this is the number of boxes, and this is the number of freezers. So we have 12 freezers filled with samples that are labeled with manual readable, human readable written text. That's not the most optimal situation, so we're working on getting that to a higher standard. And back in 2008, we started off with a more automated way of working. And that is by using the 2D barcoded tubes. This is the first screening round. We have about 6 million tubes available at this moment. That means that we are almost 80 freezers completely filled with those tubes. And with the second collection round, we started off with, of course, the 2D barcoded tubes. So in 2014, we collected about 600,000 additional tubes. And we also started with collecting feces samples and with hair samples. And the hair samples is room temperature storage. So that means that we had to imply some laboratory automation. So on a daily basis, we are processing something like 2,000 tubes and generating more than 8,000 aliquots on a daily basis. And we had some automation available for that. And this is what we have available. We have 3 Econ Evo systems that are processing the blood tubes. And these are generating the serum, plasma, and bufficose aliquots. We have 2 urine processing units, and these are 2 customized science systems that are in a +4 degrees enclosure. And these are processing all our urine aliquots. And we have 3 QIAGEN autopure systems that are doing all the DNA isolation. The disadvantage about this system is that it doesn't have a very high degree in tracking and traceability. So we also automated the front part and the back part for the DNA isolation by just implementing 2 customized science systems again that are able to lock and unlock the tubes and take care of all the tracing and also do the QC of the DNA samples that we isolated. So now it's time to talk about risks. And if I talk about risks, then I don't talk about risks, about normal risks, because I assume that every professional is taking care of its own things. So from a laboratory, you can assume that they're working to standardized operating protocols and they have applying to certain rules that are in there. And this is a picture of my garden. I had to cut down 3 trees. I hired someone. That doesn't mean that I have to take care of all the safety measurements. That means that I assume that person takes along his helmet and his cable to secure that he doesn't fall out of the tree and those kind of things. So I'm not talking about those risks. I'm talking a little bit about the additional risk and the things that you can do to avoid the risks, so the risk mitigation measurement. So one thing I already touched upon, this is a little bit about the risk management things we did for the laboratory. These are quite simple things. We implemented a visual workflow for our Lymph system. I already told you that. We also implemented visual checks on the daily process. And that can be a simple thing like we ordered refrigerators with glass doors so that you can actually see if the samples really are gone from the refrigerator for the temperature intermediate storage. Those kind of simple things. And what we do as risk management on a little bit higher level is that we taking different aliquots from the same primary tube and we're distributing them over different racks. And that means that if you're taking from this tube a sample, the first aliquot from that tube goes into this position, the second one goes to that position, and the third to this, and the fourth to that one. So you're distributing over different racks, and these racks actually end up in different freezers. And we go that far that the freezer that is taken to fill up this sample isn't next to the next freezer. It is located in a physical, a little bit separated area, because we have, for example, simple things like a sprinkler installation. If you're getting a fire, it covers an area of 9 square meters. If you're setting off the fire and you're having the material of one person on the freezer, in the freezers that are located next to each other, you're losing everything from one participant. So we separated that based on distance. For the DNA samples, we made 2 stock tubes, and one is locked for contamination. So we never touch that sample unless there's a really strong argument to investigate on things like contamination issues or something like that. So now a little bit about the Livestore. The Livestore is a high-end storage facility. And we were in the lucky position that we could build a complete new building. And that's different from most of the other laboratories, because they have to work with the existing building, but it helped us at least to adapt a complete different concept. What we did there is we centralized a certain team, and I was lucky with the definition of our board of directors that I was not able to store everything on 2 separated positions, but that I had to increase safety on 1 position. And that was purely a cost argument, because having 2 storage locations will add up a lot of costs in your daily management of all your samples. So I started off with a risk assessment about the location, because the building department came to me, I have a piece of land available, you can put your building there. And I had to say, oh, wait a moment, it's fine for you, but maybe it's not fine for me, because I want to do a safe storage over there. So I did, first thing is a risk assessment of the location. After that, we did some risk assessment about the building plans he had, so really looking at the drawings and looking at the risks that are in the building plans. And we did a risk assessment about the infrastructure, and that resulted in some preventive maintenance. So the risk assessment of the location resulted in, and we did that by doing an event tree analysis, that we're looking at top events in terms of risks, and then an example of it is sample loss, but also maybe a loss of image, because we are working with volunteers, and if you're having a image problem, then all the volunteers are walking away. That's also not a desirable effect. But we looked at top events, and some examples of that are flight routes, because there's an airport quite close, and if a plane drops down, then you can imagine what happens. We looked at other companies in the neighborhoods, and we looked at the infrastructure, and we looked at the natural disasters, and so we looked at a lot of things. And the outcome was that after some mitigation measurements, there was no elevated risk for the position for the building area compared to another randomly chosen position. So that was the conclusion, that we could at least start building on that position. Then we looked at the building plans, and we started off with that we needed a building fit for purpose. So it's turned out to be a very practical building. It's some kind of industrial area. And we ended up with a building that you see on the picture, and we ended up with, for example, from the risk assessment, with the angled roof. You can imagine the building department said we're going to make a flat roof, because that's very economic and that's very cheap. And I'm always saying, if I'm looking at a house by my, then it's always causing a problem, because water stays on there, and you have to get rid of water and ice and that kind of things. So from the risk assessment, we ended up with an angled roof, and so we ended up with a lot of different items that were based on the risk assessment. So also the whole building is elevated a little bit compared to the surrounding, and that's to avoid flooding and those kind of measurements. The final assessment that we did is the assessment on the technical infrastructure. And that was a really a big issue. Because if you, I will show some pictures about the facility, but we have a lot of -80 freezers available. And one thing that comes with a -80 freezer is strongly depending on electricity. That's one of the things. And you can, of course, get a backup generator, and that will limit the risk to quite some extent. But you still have a very high dependency, because if your backup generator doesn't work and you don't have, we ended up with a very tough discussion, but it resulted in the fact that we now have two main feeds from different energy circuits, and both equipped with a backup generator to completely eliminate the risk of power loss. But the most striking thing that came out of the risk assessment was that there were also other systems within the building that you're completely depending on. Because if you are talking about the climate control within the building, for operating a -80 freezer, it generates a lot of heat, and about 180 -80 freezers generate really a tremendous amount of heat. If you don't get rid of those heat, then you're lost, because within half an hour in the room that we're having our freezers in, it gets 50 degrees. And that means no freezer will operate anymore at those temperatures. So that means complete loss. And then the building department says, okay, yeah, we understand that. We will put some spare parts on site. But I don't know how it's in your facilities, but if I start calling to get the right person on the phone, it takes me half an hour to get the right person on the phone. And then I have to get him on site, and I have to have him repairing the thing that he needs to repair. So that's not a risk that you want to meet. So we concluded that we had to make all the instrumentation from the building, the whole total infrastructure that's essential for the function of the building, we had to make it redundant. And that was a tough discussion, because in the end, everything has to do with budgets. And if you are making the whole installation doubled, then it also costs basically double, and maybe even more than double, because you also have to implement some regulations about that, that take care of the double action and take over when an emergency occurs and those kind of things. But actually, the picture that I show here, I hope that I can show you a little bit, to make a little bit clear how we ended up, because we ended up within budget. And that's due to this picture. We are coming from a hospital environment. And if I'm talking to our building management team, then they're always talking about this kind of equipment. I call it the gold standard. It's very expensive. They need it for their patient care. They have to have a very high reliability, but it also costs a lot of money. While there probably are cheaper manufacturers around, I call it the silver option, that have a little bit lower reliability. So this one has, for example, a failure rate of 1 time a year. This one might have a failure rate of 3 times a year. But if you getting a redundant system, you're ending up with a lower failure rate, even though the system itself is behaving much less than the hospital building management is defining. So that's a nice calculation, and we even discussed this situation, and I think actually we ended up with this situation, because I still think that's they have a very, very quite high standard. But in the end, you can discuss, because redundancy with a high quality equipment also still adds up, limits some additional risk. But you can discuss if this is still the range where you want to mitigate risks in. So risk mitigation is always a balance between costs and the chance of having an incident happening. This is a picture of our freezer farm. So we have a lot of -80 freezers available. This was set up for the current samples from LifeLines, so we have to put it in somewhere. And we are already collecting from 2006 on. In the meantime, we have a facility with 170 -80 freezers. We're having a 24/7 monitoring, and there's an alarming team behind it that has to come to be able to be on the spot within 1 hour. And we are reusing the generated heat. You see here a picture. We are taking it away as quick as possible, and we are reusing it to heat up the building. We have very strict access control, and here, this is still an old picture. In the meantime, we are ISO 9001 certified. So this is a picture about the alarming and monitoring. This very normal thing that you have to take care of, and we can even see when a freezer door is opened by the monitoring system. So what did we do about the risk mitigation measurements? We did a lot of functional testing on the freezers. We did a UE tender with a lot of testing parameters within it. So how quick does a freezer restabilize about after opening the freezer and closing it again, those kind of things, the freezing capacity. Now we did a lot of tests about it. So the outcome of those tenders are really important. We have one running spare freezer per 20 freezers. We have a watchdog on our temperature monitoring system, so it keeps tracking if the system is still alive, because there might be a network that's down or something like that. We have we have an emergency alarm that's reporting problems directly from the freezer. That's an unspecified alarm, but then we know at least that something is wrong. And we link that to two auto dialers that are using different providers, because you see too often that on our internet website that the service provider has some problems with the mobile phones and those kind of things. And that's the typical thing that you don't want to meet in an emergency case. So that's a very easy thing to do, to install two auto dialers. And we have all kinds of protocols that are limiting temperature fluctuations. Now, the most special thing that we did so far in terms of risk mitigation is a project for our automated storage facility. We built up the total tendering procedure around risk mitigation, because we adapted the total concept of limiting risks already with, from the building on. We adapted this EU tender. Maybe some of you know it. It's called best value procurement. And that centralizes risks. What you normally do in the tendering procedure, we tend to write exactly what we want and how we think it should look like, and how people should try to solve the problems. So basically what we're telling, you have to go up the mountain through using this path and those kind of things. But if you're looking for a good guide that takes you up the mountain, and basically that's what we're doing in these kind of tenders, because we actually don't know what's around. We are asking, we want to go to the top of the mountain, and we want to have the most secure way to reach that. And if you're having an experienced guide, the guide will tell you you don't take this route. You will take another route, because the route is dependent on the climate conditions, the period of the year, the equipment that you have, the condition of the people that are traveling with you, those kind of things. So that's a little bit to depict how we adapted the whole risk concept. So this is what it looked like. It was also a very nice method, because I started writing with all the specifications of the system, and I had a package of more than over 100 pages with all kinds of questions and definitions and knockout criteria and that. And then I thought, does this bring me what I actually want? And the answer was, I don't know. And what we did with this procedure is we limited the amount of information that we could get back from the market. And that means that we are screening on dominant information. The people, the tender, the manufacturers were able to reply to the tender just by giving one A-FA paper with risks and added values, and one A4 paper with the scope, and one A3 paper with the planning. And that was basically the documentation that the people that replied to this tender were able to provide us with. And it means that you are asking the provider what's important about your system. And they have to filter the really important things. And I was able to read throughout all these tenders in one evening. And that's a big difference with the normal procedures with the big packages that you have to go through and do all the scoring and those kind of things. The other nice thing is in this procedure that we were able to implement interviews. So all the people that applied to the tender were delivering 4 people for 3 employees, and they were interviewed by the same person. And that they were not all 3 on the same spot again, so you were able to test the consistency of all the answers, and that revealed a lot of things that we had. For example, a project leader that said, "Yeah, that was not my answer, but I was overruled by the sales team." So those kind of answers you're getting from the interviews, and that already gives you a feeling that within the company everything is not as you would like it to be. So it gives you a lot of information to filter the consistency within the company. So it's not only a sales plan what you getting. Now this ended up with Hamilton to get the award of the tender, and the big thing about that is that the system focused completely on sample safety and sample integrity, and that gave a big scoring in the functionality. We ended up with a system with storage capacity of the current system is 8 million. But it has a modular expansion possibility to 30 million in the setup that we're having now. And during storage and sample handling, also the temperature is really guaranteed to be very low. And for example, the cherry picking is also done by -80. This is a small tour. This is a redundancy for the system at a high level. We have two systems. We have 2 I/O units. So we can basically, if one system is down, one system is down, we can use the other entrance of the system. This is the robotic that's inside the system. It can handle all the samples. And you see, for example, here you see a camera. Everything is also monitored by cameras. So you can have some visual contact with what's happening inside. And this is the outside of the system. So you can see that it's actually quite big. You can see the redundancy in cooling, because every chest freezer inside has a cooling unit. This is electromechanical cooling. That's double for every chest. And you can even see here the silver pipes, the metal pipes, and that are pipes to have a 3rd level in cooling, and that's our liquid nitrogen emergency cooling. So outside the building we have a tank of 20,000 liters with liquid nitrogen that's hopefully not used, but it's just for cases of emergency for cooling. So this is the inside. Inside the freezer, the last chest is always empty, because if you're having a problem or you need some extensive maintenance, you can evacuate the contents of a total freezer. And a total freezer contains, in this case, 800,000 individual samples. You can just take it out of it and put it in the last freezer that's always available for emergencies. So I want to end up with this slide, because risk management is a continuous process. And that means that you have to be alert, and you have to keep on watching on what's happening and how can I avoid risk, because we don't want to end up like this guy over here explaining to the press that he lost his samples. So that's where I want to end.
We have time for one question. Okay.
Why do you keep 180 upright -80s when you've got such a nice automated store?
Yeah, that's the part that I didn't tell you. But all the samples that are now in the 180 upright freezers are going to be put in the -80 automated store. And that means that we had two choices, or we can put all the freezers on eBay, or we could try to find a better use for it. And we found the last one. So all the university hospital samples will be stored in the upright freezer. And the university is going to hire LifeLines as the provider for taking care of their samples.
Thank you.